Back a few years ago, even on the highest end systems with the best graphics card possible, it was nearly impossible to be able to max out games at 1080p and yet still achieve a solid 60 FPS. And yet nowadays, that is so little of a problem that graphics cards like the GTX 1070 and 1080, or even possibly AMD's new Vega line of GPUs, can easily attain much higher frame rates at feasibly even much higher resolutions. But today, I am not using a 1070 or a 1080, although I wish I was. I'm using my trusty old GTX 970, and I don't even care about maxing out games. I just want to see if I can get them to play at over 100 FPS. But is that even possible on a mid-range card? We'll just have to find out.
Woof.
As always, I use my own computer for this benchmark, and though I won't list its full specs as those are in this video's description, I will say that I'm using the i3 4160 and 16GB of RAM. Today I tested out 6 games, with a mixture of old and modern day titles, as it should give a good indication to how viable gaming at 144Hz on the GTX 970 is. First off, I tried out Dying Light. Turning all of the settings to lowest, I was able to achieve a near flawless 100 FPS, with minimal dipping into the high 90s. The lowest I ever saw the frame rate go was the high 80s, which is very playable, but isn't anything special. If I'm being honest, the game wasn't very visually appealing at these settings. Everything looked washed out and bland, especially the water, which looked like molten plastic. Sure, it wasn't the worst graphics I've ever seen, but it didn't perform as well as some of the other titles on this list, and didn't look as good as them. Next was Shadow of Mordor. With a mixture of medium and high settings, similar to the settings I used in my video on the GTX 970 playing games in 4K, I was able to achieve 100 FPS most of the time. That just shows how well this game was optimized, and it still looks great. The one problem with this game, however, is that it is locked to 100 FPS, so even if I turn the settings down to lowest, I could never get 144 FPS on this game. But 100 FPS on medium to high settings is very impressive for the GTX 970, and is a great testament to this game and its developers. Thirdly was Doom. This game is the newest one on my list and is a recent addition to my game library, and it performs amazingly. At maximum settings on Vulcan, I was able to get 100 FPS all of the time. Only in some areas did it dip down to the mid-90s, while in some cases it went as high as 150 FPS. So if Shadow of Mordor was well optimized, then this game is somehow even better, and it still had some of the best visuals that I've seen in a long time. Turning the settings down to low made the game run slightly better, at 100 FPS average, but I believe that the high to maximum settings is the best route, as it combines great visuals with smooth 100 FPS gaming. I don't know how id did it, but they managed to make this game look amazing and run amazing too. Fourth up is Alien Isolation. I didn't really need to test this game, however, it is a title that I enjoy playing, and so I wanted to see if it was even possible to reach 100 FPS on this title, and I was very surprised with the frame rate. With a mixture of high and ultra settings, I was able to get a solid average, which stood at around 150 FPS. In tight corridors it went as high as 180 FPS, and in large open corridors with lots of things to render, it dropped to 120 FPS. All in all, this game was a very smooth experience and would work on a 144Hz monitor very well. Next is Call of Duty Black Ops 2. This game is not demanding, and is pretty unremarkable visually, but seeing as I don't own CSGO, I chose to instead benchmark this game, because in most cases Black Ops 2 will perform similarly to CSGO. At maximum settings the frame rate never dipped below 170 FPS, even though I was playing the campaign. If you were to play multiplayer or zombies, then you could expect to get well over 200 FPS. This level of performance wasn't really very surprising, as Black Ops 2 has pretty outdated visuals in my opinion. But if you like playing esports games or old COD games at high frame rates, then the GTX 970 is perfectly capable. Finally comes Dishonored. I only benchmarked this title as a kind of joke, because as I saw in my last 970 benchmark video, this game was able to get well over 100 FPS at maximum settings at 4K. So I was inquisitive to how well it would perform at 1080p maximum settings, and strangely enough, this game performed similarly at 1080p maximum settings to how it did at 4K maximum settings. there was only a slight difference of about 10 FPS. I think that this was due to a CPU bottleneck, as the i3 4160 that I have in my system is not as powerful as it once was. The average frame rate that I got was 125, but turning down some settings only raised it slightly. I've never seen this happen before with any other game that I've tested out, so I was very surprised with this. In short, the GTX 970 is a good card if you want an entry point into high frame rate gaming. On most older titles and some modern titles, like we saw with Doom and Shadow of Mordor, you should easily be able to get over 100 FPS. But on more intensive games like The Witcher 3 and GTA 5, you may have to bump the settings down quite a bit lower, or get at least a 1070. But if you are willing to turn down some of the settings, the GTX 970 can easily be a very good card for 144 FPS gaming. In fact, I'm looking at getting into 144 FPS gaming once I can afford a monitor that is powerful enough to handle that refresh rate. I made this video not only because I thought it would be fun to see how good a GTX 970 does at 144 FPS gaming, but because it personally would benefit me. If I know how well some of my favourite titles run on the GTX 970, then when I get into 144 FPS gaming, I know what settings to use for them. And I hope that you guys do too now. I hope that I've helped some people to realise that even with a budget card, you can do many things. That's what I try to do with my channel. I try to show you that cards that usually people think pretty lowly of, like the 750 Ti, the GTX 970, not 4GB of RAM, can do things that are quite amazing and that no one really thinks of. And I hope that that's what these videos are teaching you guys. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to share any thoughts you've had about this video in the comments below, or any ideas for any future videos of mine. I've got quite a lot of plans for this channel, and I hope that you'll stick around to see them out. Unless I'm too boring. I'm pretty boring. Okay, see ya. Have a good one.